It is sometimes okay to add friction, so long as you are going to use that to improve intent. In the MasterClass example, I think one big thing is MasterClass, at least when I was there, you can buy it for less than $180 a year, right? Oftentimes you'll show up because you'll thought, oh, there's like an Aaron Sorkin screenwriting class. Love the West Wing. Let me go like take the screenwriting class. And you get there, you're like, $180, like, like I don't know if I like that. But if as part of the onboarding quiz, we tell you, hey, by the way, if you like Aaron Sorkin, we also have Neil Gaiman, who's got a cool writing class. And oh, what are you excited about sports? Well, we have Serena Williams, we have Steph Curry. And by the time you're checking out, you're like, oh, okay, actually, like, it's $180, but I'm going to watch at least like 5 of these classes. So it actually like amortizes pretty good. So that's the broad idea. It was a pretty big win for us.
Welcome back to Horizons Podcast, where I sit down with marketing leaders from across the field. Today, I'm very excited to be sitting down with Alexey Komissarouk. Alexey is a growth engineering pioneer who's generated hundreds of millions in revenue through data-driven experimentation at companies you've heard of like Opendoor and MasterClass. Alexey, welcome to the call.
Thank you. Yeah, I should have you introduce me more. That sounds great.
To kick us off, I saw an interesting case study that you had done where you had implemented an onboarding quiz at MasterClass, which increased friction, but also increased the conversion rate. Can you walk us through how did you come upon that experiment and what did you learn in the process?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I can't take full credit for that experiment. I think it was something that the product manager was pretty excited about. Yeah, uh, there's this thing that, especially when you have engineers working on growth, um, engineers have this sort of mindset that's like, yeah, I'll just get rid of all the stupid friction on side, right? Like, we don't need to ask these 10 fields. Let's just get it down to 2 fields and like, there, we eliminated the friction. You don't need to enter your email the second time. You don't need to enter the password twice. Just like, the first thing, let's just cut out all the fields. Haha, like we've reduced friction. That's great. And there's this great piece by Jeff Chang, formerly of Pinterest. I think he's now head of growth engineering and whatnot, which is this framework around ease intent. And the broad idea is like, hey, it's not just about making things easier. It's also building the consumer's intent. Because at some point, you're going to ask them to do a thing that they don't want to do, which is like give you lots of money or give you their credit card or give you their phone number or email. And if they're not highly motivated by that point, it's not going to work. Right. The other like useful framework there is Derive's contractor psych framework, which is like, a user has some amount of like motivation at the point that they visit your website, and the experience they have will make that go up and down. So that's just the theoretical underpinning. The key idea is that it is sometimes okay to add friction, so long as you are going to like use that to improve intent, to eventually ask them to do this sort of like unpleasant thing that they may not want to do. And this is kind of why onboarding quizzes work. I think the classical one of these is from Noom, which is a weight loss app that does really well. I think they have like 100, 150 questions that they make you go through
That
before
is a
even asking
lot.
for any money or asking for like your email or anything. But by the time that you do ask, you're kind of bought in. And if you weren't serious, well, like you probably weren't going to pay anyway. And I've seen this quiz pattern all over the web. I think this is like, if you look at a lot of like sort of high end consumer places, you'll see lots of like, it's not just sign up. It's like, hey, like start the onboarding quiz. Or it's not called an onboarding quiz. It's called something cleverer. But this pattern, and I've seen this actually with a couple companies that I've advised as well, which is like, if you're going to charge more than $100 for a digital product, customers don't know who you are until they've like landed on your website, or even if they've only heard of you a little bit. It really makes sense to like help them get more motivated. In the MasterClass example, I think one big thing is MasterClass, at least when I was there, was you couldn't buy it for less than $180 a year, right? You couldn't get a month pass. There was no cheer options. Like, we experimented with that. But at the time, it was $180. Oftentimes, you'll show up because you'll thought, oh, there's like an Aaron Sorkin screenwriting class. Love the West Wing. Let me go like take the screenwriting class. And you get there, you're like $180. Like, like I don't know if I like that. But if you separate that, if as part of the onboarding quiz, we tell you, hey, by the way, if you like Aaron Sorkin, we also have Neil Gaiman, who's got a cool writing class. And oh, what are you excited about sports? Well, we have Serena Williams, we have Steph Curry. And by the time you're checking out, you're like, oh, okay, actually, like it's $180, but I'm gonna watch at least like 5 of these classes, so it actually like amortizes pretty good. So that's the broad idea. It was a pretty big win for us. Uh, the thing that I thought was really interesting there was the first like three or four versions of that A/B test like failed. We could not get quiz variant to do better than the non-quiz variant. It's I think for two. Well, first of all, let me give props to the product manager. I think this was like Michael Berliner, who like really believed in it and said, no, like I have enough case studies externally. Like I really believe this. We're just like, we're going to keep investing in this, even though it doesn't work. Usually in growth, you try a thing once or twice, it doesn't work. You got
Move
a big
on.
backlog of ideas. You move on. But in this case, he really had a lot of conviction on it. And then certainly like brought me along. The thing that finally made it work was removing choice. Like oftentimes it's like we would put normally you have this first call to action, like the CTA just like get started. And then with the secondary CTA of like take the quiz or like, personalize your masterclass or whatever you call it. And that never worked because like nobody wants to take the quiz, right? They just want to get started. So once the button said yes, there was only one button that said get started, but it would take you to the quiz, right? You're like, all right, I guess this is the onboarding flow. Like that's fine. And we did have a little small skip button at the bottom for people who like just were really annoyed and like didn't want to go through this quiz. But for most people, it's like, hey, you want to use our product? Cool. Like if we ask you about your interest, that's actually a pretty reasonable way to use the masterclass product because we need to figure out which courses to recommend for you. So that's my rant on the quiz. I think like honestly, like I have an article that I need to write on this. It's been on my backlog. So be on the lookout. I think I've seen like lots and lots of companies have this sort of like onboarding quiz pattern. It works really well for high end consumer.
And that's so interesting that it did not work when you gave users the option of a more detailed onboarding flow. But when you made it opt out instead of opt in, suddenly many more people went through it and it actually had a massive improvement to your conversion flow. I'm curious on one piece in particular. So there's been the classic study of like, I think it was booking.com or something, where they added a loading animation that didn't actually do anything except make it look like it was loading. And that increased conversions because people realized like, oh, the computer's working hard for me to try to find these flights. What's less intuitive to me is what you mentioned earlier of like having to enter your email twice. And I always get annoyed by this when you're on some website and it makes you enter your email a second time. The engineer in me is like, this is a complete and utter waste of time. Just copy it down. Is that something that you think also improves conversion in some way, or is it a relic of something else or useful in some other way?
No, I really don't think it's a good idea. Like usually you use it to like prevent typos, but I think most like people have some form of autocomplete at this point or the copy paste, so it like breaks that. I think that's a design pattern from like 30 years ago that's stuck around in some places.
Fair. So coming back to your point that some friction helps, some friction is truly just
Yeah.
friction and you should get rid of it.
Friction when used to build intent can sometimes be worthwhile. Friction for friction's sake is dumb. Yeah. I'm still a software engineer. Yeah. Like, I also want it to be two fields.
What do you say when you double click into what is intent? Is it more about showing the user, hey, Masterclass understands you better, therefore you'll get more value? Or is there more about sunk cost of the user saying, I've invested in this, therefore I want to continue with what I've already started?
I've actually been thinking about that, right? Because those are both good explanations. I think like I want to believe it's the former. Like it's probably a little bit of the latter. I guess you could build a worse quiz and then see how much you still get, but I haven't seen somebody run that test. If you've run that test, it's sort of the equivalent of like slowing down the website page to see like how much performance makes a difference. Like, yeah, make the quiz worse and see how much people will do it just because they've done a long quiz now.
Those are the experiments that are
I
hard to run because they're not going to do anything of value for the company, but they're very interesting findings.
They're excuse you get for I've talked to a few folks who have run stuff like that. The way you get buy-in for that is you're doing like quarterly prioritization and you're saying, hey, we want to maybe have a theme around making the quiz better. And the answer is like, well, how do you know the quiz isn't as good as it like how do you know there's more juice there? It's like, well, let's make it worse and let's see if the quality of the quiz questions like has an impact on like conversion. And if making it worse hurts, then making it better should improve. That we know this is a sensitive surface area. I mean,
That's a brilliant strategy because if you try to find a better question, you may or may not find the better question. But if you can find a worse question, then you know, okay, the question quality matters and I probably can find something better.
it'll take you a few at bats to find the better question. You can find a worse question pretty quickly.
I'm curious in this element that I'm seeing in a couple of the experiments you've discussed so far of trying even when it seems to not be working. You had to try the onboarding quiz a few times before you found the one that actually was better. How do you know when to give up and say, okay, this whole theme isn't working, and when to double down and try something different?
It's a great question. I think the short answer is like it's a gut feel decision. The answer that like ultimately like again, I'm on the engineering side. Like ultimately, like the onus lies with the product manager or the head of growth that is driving that framework. I think the thing that one thing I would say is like you want to like commit your level of conviction before you run the first experiment because it's very easy to be like, oh, but let's just try it again. It's sort of that feeling of like, oh, let's just run it another week, where it's like, now you're already pot committed. You just want to keep throwing and give money after that. So ideally, when you run an experiment, just be like, hey, are we just trying this once, or is this like a thing that we believe in that we're gonna commit to? And the like honestly, like when you're running the experiment, ideally you've written like an experiment proposal doc, and that includes all of the arguments for why it's a good idea. And it like usually it's a good idea because like, oh, this worked for us really well in these other places, or like here's a bunch of like peer companies that have tried it and it seems to have worked pretty well for them. And like if that gave you the conviction to try it once, that probably should give you the conviction to keep going.
And I find this really fascinating how the process works. Because for a lot of people who may be listening, they're at smaller companies or have not done growth engineering before, and we'll come soon to what growth engineering actually is. I want to get your download on exactly what it is. But what would the end to end process look like ideally from like someone has an idea, hey, I think we should do an onboarding flow, to we build a one pager, we structure an experiment plan, we run these experiments. What does the end to end ideally look like at a company like MasterClass?
I mean, like that. I think that was a pretty good write up. I think like on a quarterly basis, you have some number of teams whose job it is to optimize certain like towards certain business metrics, optimizing certain surface areas. And that team, like let's say we're optimizing like from somebody landing on the homepage until when they like finish the quiz. Let's say that's like our surface area. And some team owns that and they've owned it for a year. And every quarter, roughly, I mean, again, depending on your planning process, but let's say we're doing the standard OKR thing, it's quarterly. Every quarter, you have a number of bets and you have a number of themes, right? You're not just going to say, let's just try 50 unrelated things. You say, okay, what are the things we believe? What does the user research led us to? What does our past experience led us to? What do the analytics say? Okay, here are the 3 or 4 pillars or the 3 or 4 themes that we want to go after this quarter. And let's come up with lots and lots of ideas for like, ways we could, theme number one. Like we think that like people don't realize how easy masterclass is. It's only 15 minutes a day. Like let's just like, the research says lots of people are not converting because they're not have the time. Okay, let's have a theme around like telling people like how accessible masterclass is, right? And okay, we could do some stuff on the homepage, we could do some stuff during checkout, we could do some stuff in lifecycle email and abandoned cart, et cetera, et cetera. Like we can come up with a big list of ideas. And we have a handful of themes. Some of these themes are evergreen. We'll keep them every quarter because like we just keep finding like, good stuff there. And some of these we rotate just to keep things fresh and to keep finding ideas. Man, it doesn't mean that like this is all you do. Probably there's another 10 or 20% that's just like cool ideas somebody thought of that like seem good and we should let them do because there's no reason to like to first develop. So that brings us to this big bucket of ideas. Those are prioritized, some combination, using some kind of prioritization framework. I have a piece with Darius on this thing called Drice, which I think works pretty well, but you know, any prioritization framework works. And then roughly speaking, that gives you like a stacked rank list of ideas. And every week the engineers are grabbing some ideas from the top of that list, executing those ideas, setting up the experiment, sort of like, putting it in the oven, letting it run, continuing in as much. And then once things are ready, doing the analysis and then figuring out, okay, did this work? Are we shipping this or are we doing a V2 or like it didn't work? We have some ideas or are we giving it? Right. And then ideally, like, I mean, again, that's not all you're doing. Like there's always cleanup. There's always like tech debt, bugs, infra, any number of things. But the like, the main job is given all the ideas we like and given the top ones, let's go and execute a bunch of those. And again, the quarter, some amount of them will win. You should be able to do some math saying, okay, like here's the revenue that we brought because, well, this was a 5% winner and this was a 7% winner. And like, here's what that turns into annual revenue. And like, therefore, here's the impact that this team had.
Getting very, very technical, how do you measure the value of an experiment? How do you structure like this experiment won, this one lost?
Okay. I'll answer that on a couple of levels because it gets surprisingly complicated. So first of all, you do an A/B test. You say, okay, before we had the quiz, the conversion rate from like visiting the website to purchasing was 2%. Now it's 2.5%, right? For example. And we do, again, these are not MasterClass numbers, but for the sake of, let's say we do $100 million a year. So that 25% increase from 20 to 25%, from 2 to 2.5% means, the simplest way is we can say it's an extra $50 million in annual revenue. How do you know that it actually won? Well, if you see the 2 and the 2.5, you do what's called like a power analysis, and you actually check whether, I don't want to get overcomplicated. Let's say you're using a traditional frequentist, like two-sided t-test, or one-sided really. Then you see whether like the result is statistically significant, which usually you'll use a 95% error bar. And you say, okay, like, these numbers are different, but are they different just because there's noise, or are they different? And actually, like, we ran them through enough numbers that like you could tell like there's a 95% chance that this result is not random. This A is actually better than B. So that's the first thing. You check that it's actually stat sig, and the key thing there is you want to have designed your experiment up front. Like you want to have run what's called a power analysis to decide, hey, like how long do we need to run this for, and do we actually have enough signal to find the win size that we believe is available here? So that's the first thing. You run an A/B test. There's a number of methodologies, but the simplest thing is you just do a frequentist, like a t-test, and you get a stat sig result, and then you trim that stat sig result into revenue. Like you figure out, okay, like if we run this, how much more will we make this year compared to last year? Now, it turns out like the naive thing to do is be like, cool, we had 5 winners this quarter. This one was 50 million. This one was 20 million. Let's add them up, and here's how much we made. You can't do that. The reason is fancy and statistical. Like I'm an engineer. I'm not a stats guy. So folks out there have explained this better. There's a great article from Airbnb called The Winner's Curse that's worth looking at. In short, the bottoms up edition doesn't work. I think my favorite quote about this was when I was at Open Door. Our chief product officer was Tom Willerer, who was the VP of product at Netflix for a while. And he kept seeing this issue, which is like, the growth team keeps coming and telling you that they have wins, but he's like, look, like if all these wins added up the way you say they would, like my conversion rate would be 4,000%, right? And so for any variety of reasons, just because we are moving the needle forward does not mean that like conversion all of a sudden is going to get better, because there's also other factors pushing it back, and the stats don't work as easily as you would like them to do. And then, for example, if a MasterClass competitor all of a sudden, like, if there's a recession, like the conversion rate will drop, right? If there's a competitor that's undercutting us on price, right? Or like bidding up Facebook ads, right? Like all of that will hurt all of the numbers that we would like. So there are much more sophisticated frameworks to figure out how much revenue you actually made your company. But if you want the simplest solution, I think what I actually recommend is like, find the win that you did. Like, we had a 5% winner and a 3% winner and a 2% winner. So do we want to report 10%? Just report 5%. Let's divide it by 2. And that is like the first pass, like adjustment for what is the actual impact that the set of work that you did made. Again, I'll be remiss not to say I go over all of these details in significantly more depth in my Reforge course. Forgive the love, but getting a 5-minute answer on what is like an hour-long session, and then like a multi-thousand word like explanation.
Very, very detailed subject. That's a fantastic one to go watch, I'm sure. I want to zoom out quite a bit here. We've been getting deep, but what is growth engineering? And specifically, how would you differentiate it from, a lot of my listeners are going to be in marketing. How would you differentiate it from marketing? And then also, how would you differentiate it from other types of engineering, like product engineering?
Yeah, it's funny because I've written about it so much. I still struggle to have a great definition for growth engineering. I think the closest one that I have is like it's using your software engineering skill set to make your company money. Just you would think that's sort of what all engineers do, but like growth engineers do it a lot more directly, right? Like the mental model of a software engineer, like typically working on product, is like, I'm going to build this cool product, and then because I have made the product better, more people will buy it, and those people will pay us more money, and then they'll retain it. And therefore, like I have added value. So it's like we build the product, and then we check the metrics after to make sure that like we're doing the right thing. And a growth engineer says, wait, hold on, if we want to move the metric, let's just move the metric. What's all this product stuff? Like, let's just figure out, like, and if I have to improve the product to move this metric, sure, but let me also like explore like the wide space of opportunities for how I can use code to, to move the business metric, whether it's like revenue, conversion rate, like retention, etc. So in the quiz example, like we did not make like I like to think that the quiz made MasterClass better because it, it enabled discovery and people were able to like watch more classes. But that wasn't why we did it, right? We did it because we wanted to make sure that people would actually like, convert and get a chance to check out MasterClass. So it's sort of, do you put the product first or do you put the metric first and then use product? So that's the product engineer, growth engineer trade-off. I think like the other really helpful heuristic there is the 30-90 rule, where if you're a product engineer, 90% of the code you write is going to be on the code base a year from now. So like software engineers have this thing where they'll like find some code and they'll be like, what idiot wrote this? Like, God, this is terrible. And then it's your code from a year ago. And so product engineers who have had some time in the industry like know about this. And so they write code in a very careful, thoughtful way in order to avoid like sort of shooting themselves in the foot later with tech debt. Usually once they've worked in like new grads won't do this yet because they, all they have are like they're like, end of semester projects that like are basically throwaway. But once you work for a couple of years, like you really learn to write code at this sort of like high bar, this sort of like 90% rule. Growth engineers kind of have to unlearn it because we're running 30% code, right? We are running lots of experiments. Yeah, 30% is a fair experiment win rate. And if you treat all the work at the bar that like this code's going to live forever, so it better be good, you're gonna like not be nearly as fast. And so you're not going to ship nearly as many experiments. And so you're not going to have the impact that you need. And so that doesn't mean it's like a hackathon. It doesn't mean it's like a throwaway project. Your code still needs to be good in a set number of ways, but you need to be very thoughtful around, hey, I don't need to do all these things, and I can do them later once this experiment is actually won and I'll productionize it properly. So a lot of like what I will tend to do, like most people that become growth engineers, like have spent some time as product engineers first. And you kind of have to unteach them the product engineering school of thought. So that is a big difference, right? You're not building skyscrapers that are like not allowed to break. You're putting like a tent installation for burning them and like, hey, like we're gonna take this down into it's like it's fun. Anyways, so that's product engineering and growth engineering. And then how is growth engineering different from marketing? It's not sort of uh I would say it's like you know, if you take marketing and growth and we all get in a room, we're like, all right, all of our jobs is to move this business and then we're going to use the tools available. So the performance marketer is like, cool, like I can target Facebook campaigns. And the copywriter is like, great, I can write some great copy that's going to work well everywhere. And the engineer is like, cool, I can like change the website, right? And like, I can send some cool machine learning algorithms to better like power the lead score that's going to improve thing. And I can maybe use AI these days to auto generate a bunch of copy or run some copy A/B tests. But it's sort of like any anything you need to do in marketing or growth, like if you have an engineer, you can do it better than if you were just trying to use off the shelf tools. Like the off the shelf tools are getting better and I recommend them and they're great. But you get to a certain scale where it's still better to do it custom because just the capabilities are not infinite. Like the reason you start allocating software engineers to growth is because actually like there are things that only engineers can do or things that engineers can do better than off the shelf tools. And you can put a dollar number on that. And it's like, oh, okay, actually like once this engineer can like create $250,000 of value a quarter, like, yeah, we should probably staff that initiative. But you don't, it's rare that the first person doing growth at a company is an engineer because just like the product isn't there yet. And like, if your first growth person happens to be technical, great, but that isn't a hard requirement. But once you're like late series A, series B, like it's worth pouring fuel on the fire. The first thing you do is say, cool, like we need to give some engineers, like we need to put some engineers on growth because they will accelerate like what is possible.
Which is an interesting place of looking at the funnel and essentially saying, where in the funnel do we have enough juice to start squeezing it? At an early stage, you can make your website as optimized as you want, but if no one's actually visiting it, there's no purpose yet. But then as you grow further, it becomes much more valuable. And you've talked about, I think you've said that many companies hire growth engineers too early, if I understood you correctly. What is the right time to hire a growth engineer?
Yeah, I think. Well, I'm not the first person to say this, but like, don't worry about growth, like in dedicated growth hiring until you have product market fit, because you know the growth engineer is optimizing a very specific like direction that you're already moving in. If that turns out that's not where the business wants to be, like that was not a good use of their time. So first go acquire product market fit, and then acquire enough scale where the first growth engineering team pays for them. I think my rough heuristic is like if you have a high margin SaaS business, like $5 million is about right. Because again, imagine we've got like a team with like a PM, a designer, and like 3 engineers. Like you need, like if you trust that they can give you 20% quarter over quarter improvement, which is, I mean, aggressive, like that needs to pay for, their, all of their like total compensation and more. And roughly $5 billion of like revenue. Yeah. If you started at 3, it's not the end of the world. If you waited until 10, it's fine. But like order of magnitude, like Series B, order of magnitude 5 million.
Love that. And just to clarify, you said 5 billion. We can start at 5 million, right?
Of ARR. Yeah.
Okay. Love it. Love it. The next thing I was curious about is how it's different across industries. Because you've done this in the education industry with MasterClass, you've done it in the real estate industry with Open Door, and then you've consulted far further afield. How much does it vary by industry, and how much is consistent regardless of what you're doing?
The industries that I work in are like pretty, like the skills are pretty transferable. I would describe myself as working on like the high end of consumer businesses, right? And so the tactics that work B2B, like the things you can do are really different, like data enrichment, which I've done some of, but like the people that do the really magical, like I can download every possible customer and I have a data set that has all their email. And if somebody visits the website, like I see that it's Bob, from Adobe, and I say, hey, Bob, like, can I send you a coffee? Like, that's sick. That's not, we can't do that if your LTV is like, in the hundreds of dollars, right? That's too expensive. So the tactics that are available just really depends on consumer LTV. And sort of, I think the sweet spot for me is like consumer companies between an LTV of like 200 and $2,000. Because you can do performance marketing, you can do some like sales assist, like where it's really high value. And you have enough numbers to run experiments, do a bunch of pricing monetization stuff. The other thing that I'll say, like regulation ends up mattering quite a bit. So I've worked with a handful of companies that are either like have pretty strict GDPR type policies and you have to understand what's going on there. And then I've consulted for a bunch of companies that are HIPAA compliant. And so again, like the way you end up implementing all the tools, you have to be an order of magnitude more careful with HIPAA. And it turns out HIPAA is not any one thing. Like HIPAA is just like talk to your lawyer and see how aggressive versus cautious they want to be. And so it's, you can sort of twiddle this knob between like, how worried are we about getting sued versus like, how much do we need performance marketing to work this quarter? And so there's not like one correct answer with HIPAA. There's that sort of like legal gray area. And I've seen different clients like land on different sides.
That's fascinating. And it makes it both easier and harder at the same time because there's not a clear, like, this is definitely good.
Yeah, yeah. It means that my job as an advisor is not to say do X. It's like, well, you could do X or do Y. Go talk to your lawyer.
Speaking of actually going back to what you were saying earlier about the difference between growth engineering and marketing and the growth engineering and product, you mentioned if you come from the product side, you often have to relearn a lot of things. If you were to come from the marketing side, especially with AI making coding in some ways easier, in some ways easy to make terrible code, do you think that's a feasible path or marketers should stay marketers and engineers should become growth engineers?
Tricky question. How do I say this without like upsetting your audience? I think like the interface between marketing and engineering, there's sort of like a place where like this is obviously an engineer should do it, and this is like obviously a marketer should do it. There's some like gray area. I think that's definitely moving this way, where like marketers can do more things. Whereas like in the old world, like if a marketer, wants to change, let's say like 20 years ago, if a marketer wanted to change an email template, then they would like ask their engineer to make like some HTML changes, which kind of just feels absurd, right?
Which
These
is
days there's plenty
crazy
of
when you
tools
think
where,
about it. Yeah.
yeah, right. Where they can just go in and like, yeah, we've gotten all the data. Like only come talk to me if you need a novel data, if you need a novel bit of data that you didn't have before, right? But don't come to me for like generic template changes. Like either, we have a WYSIWYG thing or we have a dedicated engineer who can do that for you. And these days, hey, like just use the LLM to like make the HTML change for this email. So that is true. One thing I haven't seen that might be possible is like there's parts of the onboarding journey that are usually owned by engineering. Like the landing page, you could be doing in a landing page builder where the marketer can run A/B tests. That was true like even before AI. But like if you want an A/B test on the actual onboarding quiz and that thing is strictly in code, I could see these days a marketer going in and saying, "Cool, like I'm going to work with Claude, and we're going to generate a PR that like looks like it's this change and I can like verify that it's even stored locally, like I'm not going to ship this without an engineer looking at it. But whereas before, like I'm just another line item on a set of prioritized lists and I'm kind of begging the product manager to like include my idea. Now it's like, here's a PR, see what you think. And like now you're speaking the engineer language. That's what we want. They're like, yeah, you want to try this test? Like, I mean, it costs me almost nothing to do it. Like, especially if you've got a good prompt that like and your PR actually like follows coding conventions and like has code coverage, etc. Like, if anything, the code coverage is going to get better because of LLMs, not worse. Because usually the first corner that the engineers cut is like, okay, we don't have time for automated tests for a thing that's going to be gone, right? That's not right. But if it's just like an extra 5 minutes for the AI to add those test cases, why not?
You can automate the automated tests. You're good to go.
It's one of the best use cases of AI. Just hey, like think through the edge cases here. So I think the more complicated changes will probably still be trickier. And I don't think like a marketer should go and say like, okay, cool, like I'm an engineer now, but it's hey, like for a bunch of things, I can stop asking the engineer like for a fish and just like, like basically give them like a pre-cooked fish that they just need to say confirm is like safe to eat.
Love that.
It's still required. Like, I don't think we're there. I think like you have to be a really adventurous marketer to do that now. My guess is a year from now, like there will be tools that are like, hey, I'm in a code base, make this change for me, and then generate like a review app where I can like actually play with it without if you were to do that today, you would still need like the code base running locally, which is a pretty big hurdle for most marketers. But I imagine someone's going to streamline this workflow in a year from now.
And that's the cool thing about AI right now. It's all moving so fast that you can easily imagine pretty much anything in a year from now. I'm curious, going deeper on this learning how to be a growth engineer piece. You've written about what can be learned and what is more just the nature of who you are as a person. What growth engineering skills would you say you either have or you don't have? And what skills can you pick up on the job?
I mean, this is sort of a gimme, but like I think mindset, like you have to enjoy the process. Like I did a bunch of undergraduate research on like behavioral economics as an undergrad. And that was just fun. Like I just I like running tests on people and I didn't mind just like trying stuff. And I started a company straight out of college. So I had that sort of like risk seeking curiosity. I think if you're like on the other side, somebody who just like wants to find the best version of a thing and wants to like do it through like pure thought. And, like I found like this is the cleanest architecture. Like now it's beautiful and look at the scale. It's great. We need engineers like that. I think those engineers have a really hard time in growth. Somebody who like is curious, somebody who's like where like once you see that moving the metric is kind of a game, they're like, this is a fun game to play. But that's a different fun game than like, I wrote this thing, it's multi-threaded and it runs a million like threads a second and it's super performant. Like the thing that you can teach is like, first of all the practical shortcuts about like which shortcuts are good and bad. And there's a bunch of like growth best practices, like engineering best practices around growth. Like, hey, here's a bunch of tactics you can use. And then the statistics you can teach, the analytics you can teach, the like history of research on consumer behavior you can teach. The person kind of has to be curious about it and like enjoy the optimization puzzle. Like, I mean, I think like a quant trader is kind of like this as well, where it's like, hey, the stock market is a game, and I think I can figure out a better way to play it. It's just this game is can I get more people to buy our thing?
And where would people go to learn that like consumer behavior, the industry standards? Obviously, Reforge, where you teach, is one great place. Where else can people go to learn these skills?
Yeah, I think right. So Reforge has a bunch of courses. I have a course specifically for growth engineers, which goes a bunch more in depth on each of those sections and sort of gives you resources to take next. But like, if you just wanted to dig into one of those specifically, like my advice would be, I mean, A, just Google, or these days, talk to or B, like, find the person who does that job at your company and like see if they'll pair with you for an hour or two. Like when I joined Open Door, uh, I had lots of questions about how our business was doing that I just wanted to have answers to. And I would keep bothering the data analysts. They're like, I don't really work for you, dude. You're just some like engineer with a bunch of curiosity. Maybe I'll do this for you once or twice because I'm nice, but like, I have like actual work that's assigned to me. And eventually I'm like, oh, could you pair with me? Like, I could probably write this thing myself. And, like a couple of them were nice enough and we spent, maybe like a day or two pairing. My SQL and my like, ability to write SQL shot way up. And my like understanding of like what was what in the data warehouse and like how to self-serve questions shot way up. So, so long as like, if you want to learn to do like a good enough version of what somebody already does at your company, like probably there's somebody in your company that'll just like pair with you and help you level up. So you stop bothering them for it and just like can do most of it yourself.
And for those of us who are not in engineering and pairing might be an unfamiliar concept, can you just explain like what is it? How does it work exactly?
Yeah, that's fair. Pairing is an engineering concept saying like, hey, let's just do this thing together. One of us is gonna type and the other one's gonna, like navigate, basically like guide them for what to do. Usually the person who like if you're using pairing to learn, then the person trying to do it is like has their hands on the keyboard and the other person is just like helping them do it. I mean, yeah, pair is just a fancy word for work together, right?
It's such a brilliant concept. And I think I don't know, I feel like we should apply that more in marketing as well. It works very, very well in engineering because you're writing code, but it also works great in design and landing pages. There are a lot of places where pair programming or pair marketing could be a wonderful thing.
I did a bunch for writing. I think it works really well for that use case.
How do you do it in writing? I feel like if someone was watching me write, I would feel very pressurized to write faster than I otherwise would.
I think it's maybe editing more than writing, not like version one of a thing, but like once you're like reviewing a draft, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? And, you have a conversation at the end of that. It's like, you do the edit of the paragraph and you move on. Yeah, it's a little hard for the first draft, but subsequent drafts, it's a lot more valuable.
That sounds quite cool. I'm sure you get asked this question all the time, but it is a question I'm very excited to hear your answer. What is the most unexpected result you've seen from an experiment in your career?
Should have a better answer to this. Let's see. This is quite the example you're looking for, but one thing I learned counterintuitively is you can't trust vanity metrics. I ran a push notification test when I was very briefly at Spring, when Spring was a 15-minute food delivery company. Shout out to people who lived in the Bay Area a decade ago.
The food was very good, by the way. I live in
Right?
Singapore now and I still miss the food from Sprig. That was an excellent company.
Yeah. Exactly. And Goggin is now the main vendor, so it's folks have done all right from that. Um, so I ran this push notification A/B test, which was just like, hey, like come back, like the thing you like we put back on the menu, like just for you, come order it today. And we ran the system, and it looks at opens and clicks, right? So like, and then unsubscribes. So people got the push notification. Did they open the app more? Did they click on the app? And then we ran it versus like control notification like dinner served or whatever. And it didn't do well. It looked like it was like a 10% loser. And I was like, oh man, that sucks. And then just to double check, I popped into Siebel and I was like, hey, like of the people in the, test group versus the control group, like, what was their order volume for the subsequent month? And it turned out it was like a 10% win. It turns out when you send that push notification, it doesn't matter if they didn't open it or they didn't click it, they saw it. And if they then 20 minutes later open the app independently, like you don't get credit for it because they didn't immediately click it. Like same thing for email. Like they see the email in the subject line and they go do an action, but they like never open the email. Like, well, right? So any lifecycle marketing, SMSs, pushes, opens, clicks, like don't look at like whether they interacted with the message. Go look at the eventual behavior they that did in the app, like in the time after. And if you're measuring anything but that, it's like you're just you're falling prey to vanity metrics.
Which is crazy when you think about it, because we want to think about this as a funnel. Like, oh, first you see the email, then you open the email, then you click, then you make the purchase. But actually, it's not the case at all. They might be opening the email so they can unsubscribe, or they might be not opening the email because they just opened a new tab to go buy your product. There's no way to know the correlation of the vanity
Yeah.
metric to the actual thing you're trying to move.
The other part of this is like we're only now finally starting to fix this, but like all the lifecycle marketing tools like are made to be like to work off the shelf, right? Like, hey, just plug it in and then your like marketer can go run A/B tests and it'll be cool. But like off the shelf, all you can get are opens and clicks. And so they end up running lots of tests on opens and clicks because to actually implement the like underlying business metric, like would take more engineering support. And like half the companies are selling to don't have any engineers. And so it would be like a quarter long, like, like procurement process. Like that's great. Like, let's talk about what it would look like for engineering to even go do that. And so the other bit is like good companies will have a pretty sophisticated like in-house experimentation framework. So any experiment they run, they'll have like, here's the core metric that like is really, really the metric we care about. Like at MasterClass, it wasn't just conversion. It was like expected LTV per homepage visit, which is like a significantly more sophisticated metric where we were like willing to lose conversions today, knowing that the kind of people that did convert would be more likely to stick around, etc. Right. So like you want that metric, then you want all the like control metrics of like, hey, here's everything that could go wrong. And you want that whole set of metrics for every experiment you run. And on the life cycle side, you're not getting that because none of them are integrated with like this like, modern generation like EPO and StatSig like level of like A/B testing tools. And I'm seeing some lifecycle marketing frameworks now that like do have this built in, which I'm pretty excited about. But like, yeah, this is like definitely a big pet peeve of mine, which is like the lifecycle marketing people are running like really vanity metric driven experiments because just like their systems do not natively integrate with the really good experiment framework systems because a lot of the people they're selling to are, like the NBA or something, which is a great business, but they don't have this level of A/B testing sophistication to fall into. And so why would you implement this if only, 20% of your customer base actually needs it?
Which comes back to a theme I consistently find fascinating, not just in marketing, but in life: incentive design. Everything is incentive design. If you have the wrong thing being incentivized, like number of clicks, as humans, we're very good at driving whatever metric we're trying to drive, and we might not realize it's entirely the wrong thing. There's the quote from, I think people attribute it to Peter Drucker. It turns out he actually did not say it, but that what gets measured gets managed. And we normally think about that in the sense of like, oh, I should measure the thing that I care about. But it also works in reverse. If you measure the thing you don't care about, it will be driven, but it might not be something that you actually want to drive.
Yeah, there's this great Joel Spolsky essay from a while ago that I really like about this, which is like, every summer, the MBA intern at Delta Airlines says, hey, if we just got rid of like, 1P from the business class salad, like we would save $30,000. And then that happens like 20 years in a row, and all of a sudden the salad is shit, and it's like, and nobody can quite understand why. I think the modern version of this is like enshittification, which I think Cory Doctorow coined, where like, Netflix used to be a place to watch movies. Now it's just everything has become a weird TikTok. And listen, like that's a real problem. Like I'm worried about it. I think like you can try to correct that by making sure that the metrics that you're setting for the team and the control metrics are like have some human in the loop or some sense of quality. But yeah, like there is a sense that like growth engineering left like unchecked will just lead to this like terrible salad.
That is a really interesting point. Because going back to earlier, how do you define growth engineering versus product engineering? You're describing sort of product engineering first is making a great product and then trying to sell it. Growth engineering is first selling and hopefully coincidentally making a great product, but maybe sometimes it's selling and making a worse product. How do you systemically change that? And is there a way, like, not only to change it at one company, but to change it at a societal or a system level? Because you're right, you see this at so many different companies. The longer the product exists, in some aspects, the worse it becomes because that is what drives growth of the product.
One thing I'll call out is like, I don't think this is a growth thing. I think this is a like corporation thing. Like, look at Boeing, right? This great company that slowly got like micromanaged on the finance side to where yeah, at this point now they're having quality issues, but like, at least before the business numbers look good. And I think this is just sort of like, you know, companies, like few companies survive for like thousands of years. They generally get hollowed out and like, the financialization comes to them. You're seeing a faster rate of that happening in growth engineering teams because we can run an A/B test in a week versus it takes, years to like to ruin a company like Boeing or Intel. How can you fix it? I'll tell you what I've seen work. I don't know that I have a systematic answer. I think you need good leadership, right? I think like one thing I really appreciated at MasterClass was we had Paul Bankhead joined us, who was the previous job was at Google running he was the head of product for the Play Store.
Wow.
And so he did a pretty good job of saying, hey guys, like, what are you doing? Like some of these are like, oh, like some of these I'm uncomfortable with. And sort of have that level of taste to say, like, hey, this is fine. This, like, come talk to me. Like, we'll have to prove it on a case by case basis. And this, like, absolutely not. This is gross. And so having a strong leader, like, to have that gut check, I think I found to work really well. Again, the problem with any leader is like nobody lasts forever, right? Like, and so at some point there will be a leadership vacuum, and like more like there will be a back order, and it's like, all right, what does it take? Well, can we get rid of this boundary, right? But of all the times I've looked at it, I think it's just having good taste at the top and making sure that there's like both a qualitative check in the sense of like somebody in leadership is looking and making sure that things are fine, and then also a quantitative check of like here's a control metrics like you know I don't care if more people are like signing up if they all just unsubscribe in the next week, right?
Yeah.
Or if they're like, hey, more people are signing up, but their average NPS is like way lower. what are we doing here?
Which is interesting in one respect. It maybe comes back to what you're saying about vanity metrics. That ultimately, if you are truly evaluating for the long term value of the business, maybe you don't make the product worse. But if you're evaluating for the next year of the business and it's hard to measure the next 10 years, maybe you do make the product worse because you just don't realize it's going to hurt the next 10 years. And that's a very hard thing to measure, perhaps. Or maybe a good product truly is not a financially valuable thing in certain respects, and making it worse is a good long-term choice for the company, even if it's not as good for the user.
It's just like trivially doubling the price. Or like, I mean, Adobe is a great example of this, where like all of a sudden Photoshop is a subscription. The other thing I'll call out is like, in an ideal world, like as an engineer, my instinct is like, all right, what we'll do is we'll come up with the perfect metric. And this metric will account for all the ways you could possibly make it worse. This is like carbon taxation. Oh, you have a not okay, but like you use coal and it's so here's like it's gonna tax like this, and then ultimately we'll come to a single number that says whether this A/B test is still a winner, even if after you take into account all the secondaries. And don't do that. I think like the mark of a good metric is that it is simple and trivially explainable. So there's like, on one extreme it's like vanity metric, like open and click purchase. On the other extreme, you have this like, complicated ass black box of like the most complicated metric you could possibly put together that like ideally perfectly captures everything, but probably doesn't because the world keeps changing. And what you probably want to be like a little bit on this side where it's like this metric accounts for a good amount of the sophistication of the things that make things worse, but not all of it. But not does not try to go over here. It's still like relatively explainable. Like, the MasterClass example, like the expected LTV of a homepage visitor. But that's about as complicated as I think works well.
That is such a very important point. I love the way you framed it as what is trivially explainable. If you can easily explain your metric, it may be a good metric. If you cannot, it's probably not a good metric. And I've made so many of those. They're like in your head, oh, this sounds really cool. It solves all the edge cases. But in practice, mainly because it's so hard to explain, people don't follow it well. And because it's so complicated, if they do understand it, they probably can find a way to game it and make it look like they're achieving it without actually doing the thing you were trying to achieve in the first place.
Yeah, this is literally our taxation system, right?
Sure. Sure. Coming from true failures to failed experiments, how do you build a team that is able to handle a very high failure rate of experiments that don't work out while continuing to run toward the next experiment?
It's a good question. I mean, honestly, this is more of a product manager problem than an engineering problem because like engineers are accountable for velocity versus product managers at the end of the day are accountable for the team's impact. So it's not as bad as all that. Uh, I will say, I think like the thing you really want to like pay attention to what you praise. So if you praise like big experiment wins, then everybody says, okay, wins are what matters. Versus if you praise like, hey, like you shipped that so quickly, or like what a cool idea, and you came up like, praise the practice of velocity and the practice of iteration, which is not the same. We shouldn't celebrate wins. Then it's like, well, this wasn't a winner, but like, my PM or my said like the experiment design doc was really crisp, and they're excited to see like, what else they can do with it. What is it? If you play the right game, the score takes care of itself. Sort of this is the relevant quote there of just like you want to praise not scoring, you want to praise like, how cleanly you're running the process and how well you're executing.
And I love that distinction. I've not heard it before of engineers being focused on velocity, product managers being focused on the success of the product. How do you, and granted, this is outside of your area, but if you were to advise a PM, how do you assess whether you are doing the wrong experiments and you need to reevaluate how you choose experiments versus you just need to keep the velocity up and you will get some big win?
I mean, hopefully you have some air cover, right? So if you're a PM working on growth, hopefully your boss understands your job. And so if you are worried that like your prioritization is all sorts of a mess, like go talk to somebody, right? Like I find that like when we prioritize experiments, like I tend to be pretty hands-on with my product managers and like we'll have some good arguments about, what is a good or bad idea. And the benefit of a prioritization framework like Rice or Rice or ICE or any of these is we're not saying, I think it's a good idea, you think it's a bad idea. Well, like tough. You're saying, okay, you say you have high confidence this will win, but I only have low confidence. Like, tell me why you think you have high confidence, right? Is it that you've seen it work elsewhere? Is it like you've seen it work else, for us? Are you referencing a concept that's universally known? Like what is giving you this high confidence? Or if you think this will have like a 10% like impact, high impact, and I think this will be a small win. Why do you think it'll be a high win? What is the evidence that you have for why this is is this a really sensitive surface area where like any change really moves the needle? Or do you have some other reason to say that if this works, it'll be really big? So long as you like have a useful framework, then you're not arguing about like taste. You're arguing about evidence, and then just it all like turns into a number that is the sum of like those arguments. And so if you're worried that you have a low win rate, I mean, if you are not already using a formal prioritization framework, I think it's so great because it's literally the obvious ideas will always work. It's the counterintuitive ideas that are always so interesting where you're like I didn't somebody came up with this idea. I didn't think it was that interesting, but once we scored it, actually like it scored pretty high. So we tried it and it was our biggest winner that quarter. So it's really helpful to get the counterintuitive wins to get that framework. The other benefit is if you are seeing like you're not seeing the win rate that you need, right? Like now you have the evidence of like what your thought process was, and you can bring it to somebody else and they can actually help. Versus just like, oh, this is stupid, this is good. Like that isn't really useful feedback. Versus giving feedback on your prioritization process and like which ideas should be higher up. I think like tends to be a lot more.
It reminds me how important the skill of decision making is, which we often, or at least I often find I don't think about. You think about all the other skills that you need to build, but decision making, being able to make good decisions, is actually one of the most important skills for any profession. And if you are documenting like you're describing, you can then go back and say, okay, this is the evidence I had. This is the decision I made. Why did I make the right or wrong decision? And you can actually get better at decision making versus if you don't have the process and you just run a bunch of experiments, you might never grow in your decision making skills. And thus you may get some wins, you may get some losses, but you're not necessarily improving.
The way I would extend on that is like I would describe like what you want to have is a structured decision making process, right? A like if you are just the person making the decisions, that doesn't scale. If you have a structured decision making process where you have a doc, if you have a spreadsheet, then like you're coachable because somebody can go look at that and like weigh in. And you're able to coach like the team that you're working with because they say like, why didn't I experiment? Like I had these cool experiment ideas and none of them happened. Like why not? Or it's like, I don't know, like the boss doesn't like me. Sorry, like whatever, I'm just gonna go back to coding. I guess this is like versus like, oh, like my ideas ended up ranking low because they would take too long and they weren't moving a key metric. Or actually, this idea, like the boss says, would have like they don't want to do it because it would take a month. But actually, I think I can like prototype this in like 2 days and we could like learn something. And they didn't realize that. So let me quickly go show this to the product manager. And now we're having a conversation about the score and the prioritization and not like your sense of taste versus my sense of taste. So now I feel like I actually have a shot and a voice and like I'm able to like have an impact. And now I'm much more motivated to come up with ideas that I'm getting back. So if you have a structured decision making process, you're not only making it easier to be coached from like the people that you report to, you're also empowering the people in your organization to like improve and like have that conversation and help you improve.
That is such a brilliant framing. It works in both directions on the way up and as you bring others up with you. Switching to a very different thing, pricing. A very challenging area that almost everyone is going to encounter, and those who aren't probably should raise their prices. You led a bunch of price tier rollouts at MasterClass. What was that process like, and how did you experiment with pricing?
Oh yeah, this was kind of cool. Again, I don't want to get into too much depth on it, just out of respect to Masterclass. But one of the interesting insights that we had was we wanted to drop the price, uh, but we you can't really experiment on price. Or at the time, we could not easily experiment on price because we did not have the capacity for multiple pricing tiers. And the investment of that would be like tens of engineers and like a quarter of works. And it's sort of, it's more than you can reasonably ask, like for a hunch. And so the key insight that we figured out is like, we figured out a way to do fit door testing on pricing. Where so fit door testing is this idea of like, you pretend you have a thing and then like they click on the link and you're like, just kidding. Like this product is not available, but you can give me your email and I'll reach out when it is. It's like kind of annoying when companies do that, but it's a really useful way to learn. So if you're masterclass, you can't really be like, just kidding, you thought this product cost less, it costs more. No, it's like a lawsuit. So we found a way to, like, I think like I was pretty proud of this. Like we found a way to experiment with showing lower tiers through a fake door that didn't piss anybody off, that didn't upset anybody. And the idea was basically like we would show as if we had multiple tiers on the front end, which is just only front end work. The cheaper tiers would, the fancier tier had all the features, but like cost as much as the current product. And the cheaper tier like had way less features, but like cost a lot less. And so the trick was, if you click the lower tier, we told you, hey, congratulations, we've upgraded you to the fancier tier for no extra cost. Which, am I saying that right? I think yeah. And then you just use a coupon code to
Brilliant.
basically like to give them that. And I think the other part was, let's say that we have the base price and somebody wants to have a more expensive tier. We can do the same trick where you'd say, hey, like this is the normal cost and this will have all the extra features, but all the extra features actually exist in the current plan today. So when they get the fancy thing, you say, hey, congratulations. Like we're currently running a promo where you're gonna get all these benefits, but actually at this price. And in the back end, it's actually just the same plan being sold like with a different story being told. So you can have both a cheaper version and a more expensive version, and you use a combination of coupon codes and like discounts to like nobody's mad. Like it's kind of a fake door because they said this, and then what you're giving them is strictly better than what they asked for. Where it's either like more features or it's like less money, right? So no one's mad if you fake door them into an upgrade. Like if you get on a plane and somebody's like, "I'm sorry, sir, we're gonna have to upgrade you to business," you're like, "No," right? But that gives you that gave us at least the flexibility to experiment on price and validate the impact that we would see without investing all the engineering up front. Because the only engineering was like the one pricing page and like the alert saying, "Sorry, we have to."
It's genius. And I love because a lot of times when I've approached this sort of thing, you would do something like a conjoint test, which is great. It's an experimental framework. It shows people a synthetic landing page and they choose, but it's fake ultimately. It's survey data. And so it may not reflect the reality of what it would look like on your actual landing page. Whereas this gives you real data. You can see this is what it actually, how it performs on my landing page with the context that people have for the exact audience that's coming to this landing page. It's brilliant.
And you don't have a bunch of like, if you're $1 billion company, you can't kind of like give people fake stuff. Like you've got, you got a bunch of celebrities, like you have a reputation to uphold. So like, this is on the one side, we got a bunch of learning. On the other side, like nobody that was in that experiment, I expect would be mad.
It's a win-win. I'm curious. So this is thinking more about a subscription product at MasterClass. I'm curious how you think about growth engineering as applied to one-time purchase models. Does it still work, or is it only for a subscription product?
Or if it's a slightly simpler problem. I mean, usually if you're doing a one-time purchase, like e-commerce is really common. And so then it's like, how do we optimize somebody buying a $2,000 product versus a $20 product? Then it becomes like, so because in the recurring world, you say at the point of purchase, can we predict how likely this person is to stick around? Like your Figma, and you say, okay, this is the designer, they're going to renew for 5 years, and if it's like a manager, they're going to renew for like a year and a half or something. Like I don't know if that's true. That's like you could build a model like that, and a lot of the sophistication is like we are willing to like get more of the right kind of customers. We want to predict like at the point where they purchase, like how long they'll retain. Versus in e-commerce, it's like at the point we bid for them, we want to guess what kind of product they'll buy. And then also, even if it's a one-time purchase, it's not really a one-time purchase because like ideally they're going to keep buying. And so you end up doing a bunch of data science to like think about that sort of model. I think the skills are roughly transferable. It's a little slightly different ball game, but not significantly.
I love that. Well, that brings us to the end of the interview. But before we get to the close, I have a lightning round. So I'll throw out some this or that type questions. Feel free to give a brief answer, a longer answer, either way. The first one, this came up in some of your research, feature flags or branch deploys?
Feature flags, 100%.
Bayesian or frequentist statistic?
I don't understand the Bayesian stuff. I keep on having to pretend that I do, and like on some level I do, but like honestly, like frequentist works. There's a bunch of upgrades. I mean, actually, no, sequential is really the answer. Uh, but like if you're just getting started, frequentist, like don't reinvent the wheel.
Love that. I feel like I have at certain points known both of these, and at this current point, I do not know either one of them. But I'm sure we could get back there with some good LLM help. Multivariate tests or A/B tests?
It depends. Often A/B tests, just because you don't have the numbers to like be running 4 variations. And usually if you, I mean, like if you don't know what your best guess is, like if you need 4 of them, okay, sure. If you have the luxury of infinite traffic, sure. But like really, like the first place I would cut scope on, like, if you're trying to like be able to detect a smaller result, is getting down into the variations.
First principles thinking or pattern matching?
I feel so bad about this because this has really changed. I feel like as an engineer, I'm a big first principles guy. And then as somebody who's been in growth for a year, it's pattern matching. It's like, don't reinvent the wheel. Like, don't be clever. First, like, all the good ideas, just like copy them. Like, there are best practices. The win rate you will have on the best practices is way better than the win rate you will have on your ideas. So pattern match first, like exhaust like the obvious good ideas that you should like, what is it, like good artists copy, great artists steal? Like first steal, then you can start to innovate. Like I think it is definitely a mistake to just like start but don't try to reinvent growth from first principles. You don't have the time.
Don't waste your time being clever for no reason when you can just steal it instead. Homepage optimization or checkout flow optimization?
I'd say checkout flow optimization just because you can leave the homepage to like a non-technical user these days and they'll mostly be fine. Versus if you're bottlenecked on engineering, like just have those engineers spend time on checkout optimization.
Small incremental wins or big audacious attempts?
Both. I know. Sorry, I'm the worst at this. I love small wins. I think like if you do all big wins, you're not really a growth team. You're just a product team that doesn't want to like do growth instead of just doing big projects. If you're only doing small wins, you'll get caught in a local maximum pretty quickly and like you'll lose trust. So you need to do a mix. I love the small wins more. Like personally for me, like it's just fun to do like a lot of things. But yeah, if you're not taking a big bet, like once or twice a quarter, then like that's a bigger risk because you'll hit your local maximum much sooner.
And that's such a fascinating concept. For anyone who's not familiar, can you just briefly explain what is the local maxima problem?
So it's you're right. I started explaining this in my head with the mathematical nomenclature, and that's not helpful either. It's if you keep making the same website a little bit better, you will eventually get pretty close to the optimal version of the website, like that you can get to with small changes. And actually, what you need to do is probably a redesign and like sort of like start over from scratch. And like you need both. But like sort of anywhere you are, like you will hit the best version of that thing if you never take any big swings. And you need to go and like explore a little bit further. That's a terrible explanation.
That's a good explanation. It's a fascinating concept that I think we often fall into, especially in experimentation. User research or user analysis or data analysis?
Analysis, because I can do it easily. The user research is great, but it's just like it's a project, Like analysis, I can pop into Amplitude for like half an hour and come back with a bunch of insights.
That is very true. The amount of time needed is quite different. Well, that brings us to the conclusion of the interview. Where can people go to learn more about you and the work that you do?
So I do growth engineering consulting. If you're spinning up a growth engineering team or you have one and like things don't feel right, reach out to me at alexeymk.com. I also have a growth engineering course on Reforge. So if you have growth engineers who usually were not growth engineers until they became growth engineers on your team, that is probably the single like course that they should go through. We run it synchronously. We'll be running it at H2 at some point synchronously, but if you can't wait, you can get access to all the content async. I think it's pretty valuable.
It's awesome. All of that will be linked below or in the show notes if you're listening on a podcast. Alexei, thank you for coming on the call.
Thank you for having me.